What's funny is this is unsettling right from the get-go, because he fell asleep in a car. She wakes him up, and I thought they'd be on a road. No, they're on a barge in like a river.
I love this setup of their car being parked on the ferry that's taking them where they're going
it's
for
so
a
good.
setup to sort of a horror story.
Yes.
They are trapped there. Like, I don't,
That's
like
right.
This ferry
You
is
can't
not
just
gonna,
leave easily.
You can't just leave.
That's interesting.
Right?
That's
getting
actually
into this town requires getting onto this ferry and being carried across the water.
Oh, interesting.
So like setting up that as the place.
That's right.
Where it's not easy to just drive out and escape, I think is a great way to kind of build some tension right from the beginning. Like, this is not a place that's easily escaped. Alan Wake, a famous crime novelist from New York City, lives in a world of stories, especially those with supernatural elements. But he's been suffering from writer's block for 2 years, so he and his wife, Alice, head to the remote town of Bright Falls for some peace and quiet. Suddenly, Alan finds himself driving along a dark road at night. Before he can stop, he hits a hitchhiker on the road. However, as he gets out, the man is gone, and the road he was just driving on is blocked behind him. Alan then realizes that the man is a terrifying, shadowy figure possessed by a dark presence. He gives chase to Alan, taunting and attacking him. Then, a mysterious light saves him, and he learns that only light can harm the shadows that pursue him. Eventually, Alan wakes up from this nightmare, disoriented.
When Alan wakes up from the nightmare, it's Alice basically telling him like, "Hey, wake up, you know, things are kind of crazy." At least I'm pretty sure that's how it goes.
It's like, you fell asleep in the car. It's just a nightmare.
Right. That's right. So she's saying, because he hears a voice saying his name, and then it's like, "Alan, wake up." And then Alan wake, right? Alan, wake up, right? There's that joke is going to be very, very common throughout the series. But it's her in the car. She's saying, "Hey, you dozed off," and he is actually surprised by this. Like, "What? I went to sleep?
Mm-hmm.
What?" If she says, "Oh, just for a little bit," and he says, "Well, yeah, any longer than that would have been news for everybody." You know, like, I don't sleep well. And that's the way that this whole thing ends. But that whole thing was a nightmare, right? So he and Alice are headed to Bright Falls for some peace and quiet, and then he falls asleep while she's driving, I guess.
Yep.
And then he has a nightmare that he's driving and he just like wrecked everything and people are dying. And it says very specifically, people from his own books are trying to kill him. And it's like, "Oh, but it's a dream. Oh, it's just a dream. Oh, good. Okay, I'm good. Just a dream. Everything's fine." What's funny is this is unsettling right from the get-go, because he fell asleep in a car. She wakes him up. And I thought they'd be on a road. No, they're on a barge in like a river, or a lake. Well, I actually think it's more like a river.
River, I think.
Because there's that bridge going over. There is a lake, but this might be a river leading to the lake. I don't know. But they're going under a bridge on this basically a ferry with cars on it. So that's weird right off the bat, where it's like, yes, he's in a car, but it's not what you... Oh, first off, that whole thing was a nightmare. Haha, not what you thought. Now this is the real world. But once again, even the real world, this isn't what you were expecting, was it? We're on the water in a car right now. And like, that's a perfect kind of setting for this whole thing. And as the camera kind of moves up and moves over Bright Falls and gets pretty close to a lot of the buildings, I'm also thinking, oh, good thing they did that whole open world, designing the whole town and everything, because then you could have this really nice intro shot where everything's in place and it looks really nice. But while he's on the barge, he gets out and he's like, he talks to the radio guy and then she's like, "Hey, you made a friend." And she's kind of poking him a little too, right? Like, it's, "Oh, cute." She says something like, "Cute, you made a friend," or something, like kind of treating him with little kid gloves. And he just kind of, pushes right back at her. It seems gentle, but at the same time, that's all we see is the gentle pushing and not any of the, "Hey, I actually like you." We don't see that.
Yes.
And that does make it a little strange when she later disappears and he'll do anything to get her back, because we weren't able to really see them being close together. but we do get some flashbacks.
Later on, I was going to say beginning of chapter 2.
Yeah.
There's a good one where it goes back and they're in their apartment. You get some good interactions between
the flashbacks give us a little bit of both once again, but a much tighter knitted relationship, it seems, where they're actually working together. She designed the cover of his book.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's like, oh, they are partners in business as well as in life.
Yeah.
So
I love this setup of their car being parked on the ferry that's taking them where they're going
for
so
good.
setup to sort of a horror story.
Yes.
They are trapped there. Like, I don't,
that's
like
right.
this ferry
you
is
can't
not
just leave easily.
You can't just leave.
That's interesting.
Right?
That's
getting into this town requires getting onto this ferry and being carried across the water.
Oh, interesting.
So like setting up that as the place.
That's right.
You know, where it's not easy to just drive out and escape, I think is a great way to kind of build some tension right from the beginning. Like, this is not a place that's easily escaped. So I thought that was really a nice.
That's brilliant. Because I was wondering too, for me, it was just eerie to have the boat on a barge, right? To just introduce the idea to you, hey, this isn't what it seems. Even the real world isn't what you think it is when you have your limited perspective first glance, right? There's more going on here than you thought. But I like that a lot. He's isolated by water in this specific town.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about the nightmare a little bit. Basically, it's tutorial stuff. You know, the light shows up and says, "Here's how you play the game. Press X." It's not that. It's not that direct. But it's, here's a flashlight. There you go. Now here's a gun. He's still your enemy, remember? And so they kind of give you some gameplay stuff, but it introduces the whole dynamic. There is the darkness and the shadows that are part of his fictional world. And then there's this light that every now and then can kind of pierce through the darkness and shine in and give you directions, give you items to help you out. But when the light passes you, the flashlight is where I got some Prometheus vibes here.
Sure.
Where it's like this being, whatever it is, we're living in a world that is ruled by the darkness. Yet there's a character that seems to possess the light and will even take it and give it to us, despite the wishes of the greater powers that be in the darkness. That maybe the light is even subjected to some degree, right? But here you go. Here's what they don't want you to have: a flashlight.
Yeah.
So, you know, Prometheus, of course, the god who gives fire to the humans. And then he tells us, "Okay, now go to the lighthouse." Lighthouse is a beacon that is just leading you there. A lot of the like themes of this story seem kind of simplistic. These could easily fit in a children's novel or a Disney movie from the 80s, where it's like, oh, the light and the darkness, and but don't get, it's a Kingdom Hearts, basically. We got Kingdom Hearts themes, yet packaged in this survival horror type game.
That's funny you say that, because somebody brought it up in the stream where I was, playing through the game. They were like, that line, it could be straight from Kingdom Hearts, whatever was said there. It's true about light and darkness.
But that also goes to show you that even maybe simple themes that we will maybe read to young children are still things that grown-ups have to deal with and contend with on a daily basis too, right? And that they can be treated in such a way to where it doesn't feel so childish anymore, and it's actually really deep, even though it's a pretty simple idea to begin with, right? Yeah. Well, what's more powerful, the light or the dark? Well, I don't know. And that's basically a big theme of this game. So we get that set up here. We get, all of the gameplay mechanics and all of that stuff out of the way. And then, of course, we get the fact that, well, it's a nightmare, right? But it feels real.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that through these first 3 chapters, they're definitely blurring the line between which world is the real one, because there are some very specific differences. Mm-hmm. So, like, you have your daytime sequences where the world seems one way, but that's not the way that matches his story of how he got there, or what happened to Alice, right? Or the fact that the lake itself and the little island and the house that was there is not apparently there. So you've got this sort of like story that is blurring the lines between, is Alan imagining things or not, and in which direction, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, is he imagining the scenario in which he arrived at Bright Falls with Alice, Or is he imagining the dark beings and all of this stuff? Or the third scenario, the daytime scenarios in which he didn't come there on the pretexts by which he believed to have come there, which was to get some peace and quiet and write his story.
Right.
But rather to see a psychiatrist about certain mental conditions he and his wife had, like which reality is the real one, is kind of like the mystery that it's setting up. And it does a really great job.
Yeah,
did you write down
very eerie
at all the Stephen King
Yes,
quote?
I did. No, I didn't write the whole thing.
I would like to read that if
the
we
entire
can.
Thing?
Yeah, and kind of break it down. Let's pull it up real quick.
I just put the end part. Stephen King once wrote, "Nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one. The unanswered mystery is what stays with us in the long run, and it's what we'll remember in the end."
So, here's something generally I think is a good idea to keep in mind. Anytime a story begins with a quote like this, it's probably really, really important to understanding what that work is about.
Yes, yeah.
Whether it's even something short, like at the beginning of Xenogears, I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last.
Yes.
That is important to understanding that story.
Yeah.
I can't remember what it was that 2B says at the beginning of Nier Automata, but it's something about killing God, right? It's like, I wish I could find this kind of being and I would kill him or something like that, right? So whenever you're starting the work and it's like, we're putting real hard emphasis on this quote, in this case, it's a Stephen King quote, which they asked him permission to include.
Yeah.
We should really look at that closely and try to determine, okay, what do we think that's saying? And how is this going to lead into what are they trying to tell us here with the Alan Wake story overall? So as you read that, what would be some of your first thoughts?
Well, first off, my initial thoughts have maybe a little bit to do with the ending, but if I can keep it kind of within the confines of the beginning of the game here, I would have to say that sometimes finding all the answers isn't the point and isn't good or necessary or the right way to do it, or all of those at once, right? That questions, sometimes asking the right questions is more important than finding the right answers, if that makes sense. Questions are mysteries, and questions can be very useful in terms of like a frame, establishing a framework for something, right? And an answer is like finding a point inside the frame. Oh, here's the point, right? Here's the answer. I found the answer. But sometimes the frame or something that maybe has less of a specific point to it, right? Something like a question or an open-ended or a mystery, right? That these things are very powerful and actually shape society, culture, the world in ways that we don't understand because we're so oriented towards just finding the answer to everything all the time, right? And we can't. We can't know the truth, the answer, the point of everything all the time. At least I don't think we can.
Yeah.
Who knows? The future may hold.
Well,
but I don't believe that the world works that way.
Tried really, 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 really hard over the last 15 or so years to be like super careful in how I research and listen as closely as I can and be super fair and like just been like just incredibly concerned with truth over whatever I believe or whatever seems intuitive or assume. Yeah, it's absolutely frustrating to admit you can't.
You can't. It's
you just
impossible.
Can't get there.
But that doesn't mean you abandon the mysteries, though. The mysteries have value in and of themselves. The questions are still important, and finding the right question is often more important than finding the answer to said question any question in general. Often mathematic equations are like this. It's like the equation is more valuable than whatever answer you happen to input. The equation with all of its x's and algebra and number, like that doesn't tell you anything. It's just an equation, but it's a framework within which you can find answers to other things, right? But until you discover the question, you don't have anything, right? The question, the mystery, the framework, the frame is way more important than any of the specific answers.
It's not about the answer you come up to. It's about how you work towards it.
Right.
What system
in
your life are you putting in place to engage with and properly examine questions
Right.
to try to find truth.
Yes.
Again, you're never going to arrive. This, according to Nietzsche, as we have discussed a lot in the past, is not the point.
Right.
The point is not the ends. It's the journey getting there that forms who you are as a person.
Exactly.
And so treating it like that, I think that mathematical equation analogy is like a perfect way to frame this concept. The more concerned you are about the answer, the less you are getting the point, I would say, of life, which is what equation are you writing to help you find answers?
Sure.
What framework or system do you work inside of to get there? And what kind of person is that system shaping you into?
Right. Yes, absolutely. Because a frame, think of it, what a frame is, it's a constraint. These are constraints. These are boundaries, right?
Yeah.
But the boundaries set your attention. They set what within which, you know, what you can do within the boundaries, right? Without boundaries, you can do everything / nothing, right? There is nothing / everything to do when there is no frame or like perspective or anything like that. But once you set that, then you have something to work with, right? You actually have something there. And this reminds me of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, where they find out the answer to the universe, and it's 42. And they're like, oh, well, maybe we should have been looking for the right question this whole time instead of the answer, because it turns out the answer doesn't even make sense. I don't even know what that means.
Yes.
Now, I haven't read all the books that I don't know what the question is, but because I had heard somebody say the question is, and it's just a simple math problem, but that 42 was wrong. The computer got that number wrong. I don't know if that's exactly it or not. But the idea is you're always going around looking for answers, and sometimes what you really need to be doing is looking for questions and mysteries upon which to orient your life and not worry so much about finding the point, as if that were the point to begin with. I don't know. It's kind of hard. Where language escapes me sometimes to speak about mysteries and questions and frames and things, because we are such a point-oriented, language. Like, what's your point? Every sentence you tell me, I can always oh, I see your point. Oh, points. There's points everywhere. But that's a reductive, atomistic kind of view of the world, where it's a world made of points, right? Like pixels or dots or atoms or whatever. And it's like, no, the world isn't just a static, collection of atoms. There are things, there are blobs, everything flows, like what Heraclitus says. There is unity and multiplicity simultaneously at the same time. And that's what we actually need to kind of work towards understanding, instead of just seeing points and looking for points everywhere. Yeah.
I find it funny, point of significance, that it is Alan Watts.
Ooh, very interesting.
Who made the points about bits versus the goo.
Yes,
right?
that's more or less, where I'm getting at. Yeah.
I'm not going to recite that right now. Go research Alan Watts,
Google
bits and goo.
Goo.
It's a great little piece, but it goes along with what you're saying. But I want to look at this first line again. Nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. They're antithetical to the poetry of fear. This to me has been almost like one of the biggest frustrations, and I feel like I'm kind of sort of finally starting to realize, looking for the answer, is not the important thing, and you're not really gonna get anywhere in life as long as you're focused on trying to find the answers. Life doesn't make sense. At all.
That's fair enough.
And almost nobody predicts it correctly.
That's true.
My favorite example to illustrate this is more in the sports talk show world.
Oh yeah.
Where people, they literally make their careers on getting on TV or their radio show and predicting what's going to happen, or telling you how it is, and this is why, and breaking down and analyzing it.
It's a big market, and sports betting is a big deal. So a lot of people listen to that.
I know. I know, and it's insane to me that you would. It's so unpredictable. That's why we are so interested in the first place.
Right.
If you could form however many layers of analytics to actually predict what's going to happen.
Like Moneyball.
Nobody would watch it anymore.
You're right.
The whole point is that they actually play the games.
Right.
And so
there is an element of fate or wind or weather or there's something, the football being shaped the way it is. I remember talking to your dad once. We were talking about football and I was like, oh, this team will beat that team for sure. It's in the can. And your dad was just kind of like, well, hold on a sec. You realize that this is football we're talking about with refs that miss things and with where you don't know what the weather's going to be. And the ball is shaped like whatever the heck is a Vesica Pisces would be the 2D, but I don't know what it is in 3D. But like you realize the ball is shaped and bounces weird. Like how do you know who's going to win? That? And I remember that was the first time anyone had ever actually challenged me on my just blanket statement of I know what's going to happen. And it was your dad, and it was really kind of a funny moment. And it stays with me now. It's probably been 15 years since he said that, and I'm thinking every time I hear people say they know what's going to happen now, I'm like, yeah, you realize the shape of the football basically guarantees that you don't know what's going to happen.
Yes.
That thing can bounce backwards 10 yards on a whim whenever it decides to, whenever the fates decide.
Or hit the ground and bounce forward, or bounce sideways, or just stop.
Or just stop. That happens sometimes. Yeah.
It's so unpredictable. Life is unpredictable in this way. And so I think nightmares, in this case, are a good analogy for the fear of the unknown, which is just life in general. We just don't know what's going to happen. Yep. And a lot of people, they take a lot of precautions and they work really, really hard to prepare for any, type of scenario.
For every eventuality is what they say.
And as we've talked about in BioShock especially, there's just no way that you can predict or set a contingency for every outcome.
Yeah.
There's going to be something you overlook, and that will be your undoing.
Yep.
And so, life in a lot of ways is like a nightmare. It's unpredictable. You can't explain it. It isn't logical.
Yeah,
there's so much irrationality or just non-rationality.
Yes, there's a distinction.
That makes its way into this. And you need an equation, a system to be able to deal with things as they happen unpredictably in order to shape you into the type of person that is prepared to deal with the conflicts that you come across.
I love it.
That is kind of my reading into what Stephen King is saying there. We'll see how well this comes to, I guess, fruition in the story of Alan Wake.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So the way that this whole dream sequence ends before he wakes up is with this poem spoken to him by the light source, right? And I don't think we know the name yet, right? So but the light basically reads to him a poem, and I've listened to this several times now, and I can figure it out better than the first time. But the first time playing it, it was pretty funny. But it says, "For he did not know beyond the lake he called home lies a deeper, darker ocean green, where waves are both wilder and more serene. To its ports I've been, to its ports I've been. Do you understand?" is what the light says. And Alan Wake's like, no, what are you talking about? And if I'm to analyze this poem now, for he did not know beyond the lake he called home. So there's a lake that is his home, right? Lies a deeper, darker ocean green, right? So beyond the lake that he calls home is a darker ocean that's deeper, where waves are both wilder and more serene. To its ports I've been. I am going to throw some Carl Jung in here. I think this game merits it. I think it's pretty clear there.
Yeah.
But that you have your own little place, your own little island in your own little lake, which is your subconscious mind, right? But that there's also an ocean out there that surrounds all of it. That is the collective unconscious. That is where the real nightmares are, basically, right? Like you can have your own personal nightmares, but there's also the grander scale nightmare, which you may as well just call it life. Yeah. Like there is a whole nightmare that everyone collectively is living together.
Oh, yeah.
And well, luckily there's light in the dark though. So a nightmare can become a good dream through, well, sometimes not. But that poem there, I think, is alluding to something greater beyond just your conscious and subconscious self, that there's actually a greater collective unconscious kind of at play here, which does take away the solipsistic interpretation of this game as like it's all in his mind, right?
Right.
Because there's a lot more to it than just that.
Yeah, for sure.
Alan and Alice arrive in Bright Falls and settle into the town. They meet various locals, including a peculiar waitress named Rose, a huge fan of Alan's work. Barry Wheeler is Alan's friend and agent, who is skeptical about the trip and worries that Alan will struggle without writing. But Alan is determined to take a break from writing to focus on his relationship with Alice.
They kind of set this up with a phone call, right? Like Barry calls in the middle of the vacation. It's like, and she predicts it, right?
She's like, he's going to be calling every 5 minutes.
Barry's going to call you a bunch, and he's like, yeah. So Barry's obviously, this is again setting up the pressure on Alan to write something.
But what's funny is that he then they have their little snidey moments back and forth, right? Where she's like, your phone's going to be ringing every 5 minutes. And he goes, I can turn it off whenever I want to. But he doesn't.
Yes.
Right? So it's like, yes, you can, can't you? Interesting. And then he gets a text and she's like, see, that was him again. And he goes, Barry says hi. But it's, yes, you can. This is often a thing that I hear. When I was growing up, this was a common thing that I would hear from maybe people who smoke or something, that they say, I can quit whenever I want to.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, I guess you don't want to now, I guess. And the truth is, no, it's not that easy, right? Yeah. And Alan is dealing with stuff that's not that easy. He thinks it's easy. He says it's easy.
Wants to believe
I can just do this and my problem's gone. See, don't nag me, wife. Mm-hmm. And it's like, but then you're not doing it, right? So the fact that you could do something so simple, but you still won't do it means that there's something deeper that's really kind of holding him back from doing what he already knows he probably ought to do in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Right. As they get into the town, they separate for a moment. He's supposed to stop by a diner and pick up some keys from like the owner of
a map.
What today would be the Airbnb. It's the cabin they're staying in or whatever.
I love this cafe.
Yeah.
A big call out to Twin Peaks.
Yes, really really
Yeah.
So wonderful. You meet Rose there. You meet like the two
old gods of Asgard.
Dudes.
Yeah. Thor and Odin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then forget the name of the lady who switches the lights on and off and is always worrying about replacing the bulbs.
I can't remember her name either, but that's a fascinating character.
Yeah, because this all culminates, this whole scene culminates, because obviously Rose is like a huge fan of like an obsessive fangirl of Alan Wake, and she's got like a cutout of him like in the entrance of the
that
diner.
She took from the bookstore after his promo was over.
And he's like trying to keep a low profile, and like that's not going to happen now.
No.
And so like these rocker dudes are have you put a song on the jukebox, but you go over and she's trying to like turn the light on. It's dark in the hallway leading back to the restrooms. And she's like, don't go down there,
Well, hold on. I actually wrote down exactly what she says because this was, because I didn't catch this until my second time going through the game, right? She says, don't go in there. You can hurt yourself in the dark.
Yeah.
Now, that's a weird way to phrase that in English. We would say you can get hurt. We don't typically say you can hurt yourself in the dark, right? But that's what she says. And then as we go in and then come back out, she says once again, you got lucky. You can hurt yourself in the dark. That phrasing is very important. And it's something I did not catch the first time. But the second time I'm thinking there's something way more important to that. Now, once again, I'm saying it's not everything that's happening that we're going to talk about here is not just all in Alan's head, but some of it is. And in a way, his willingness to enter into the darkness without a light does cause some of his own suppressions and issues to kind of come forth, and he could end up hurting himself if he goes into the dark. Very fascinating. But when he walks in there, he meets this woman who I don't think is named yet, right? I want to talk about her name when we hear it.
Her name's Barbara Yaga. I mean, we will know that by the time we get to chapter 3, which is what we're covering today.
Very good.
But
Barbara Yaga.
It's not supposed to be her. It's supposed to be some other person.
Yes, he was supposed to meet a guy
who was in the restroom.
Yeah,
and he was knocking on the door there to like, hey, I need to get this key from you. And she's like, oh, I can do that. Like, whatever. Yeah. But yeah, so we need to talk about Baba Yaga, I think, in relation to this character.
Yes,
I'll let you take that away.
So Baba Yaga, or I think in the Russian it's Baba Yaga, something like that. Ancient witch, old fairy tales, like in English, we have I guess they're more Germanic, but we have Hansel and Gretel and we have like the witches, like from Shakespeare and stuff. Well, the Russian and Slavic folklore, by and large, has this witch named Baba Yaga, and she is fascinating. I have read a ton of books about her. In fact, my daughter dressed up as Baba Yaga for Halloween last year.
That's awesome.
And this year, she dressed up as Koschei the Deathless, just in case anyone was wondering what kind of father she has. But moving on. So Baba Yaga eats children, and she lives in a house that is standing on chicken feet, and that kind of dances around and can move. And she goes about with a mortar and pestle. So she sits in a bowl with like like grindy. It's kind of like a spoon kind of thing. And then she pulls herself forward with the spoon, and with a broom, she wipes away her tracks behind her. So you can't ever tell where she's been. Which the Finnish, by the way, the Finns have one of those weird half Scandinavian, half Slavic kind of, half Germanic, half Slavic kind of culture, right?
Sure.
And they have their own unique culture, first of all. It's unique and different. But the influences from both Scandinavia and from Russia have really kind of made it so that Finland is just a very unique place. But they do have a lot of Slavic influence there. And so they will have heard growing up stories of Baba Yaga and Koschei the Deathless.
I always find cultures that are kind of on that frontier between two very different ones.
Turkey is one of those.
Very interesting. Where you see sort of the West and East influence on them and the way they incorporate both in very interesting takes. As far as like Christianity goes, you have like the Eastern Orthodox, which is so different in a lot of ways from Roman Catholic. But it's right there, kind of bordering up with Asia, and so you get a lot of those ideas bleeding into it, and you get this very unique form of Christianity, right? Yeah. This is maybe a similar kind of thing with the Finnish culture.
Yeah, I think so. They're very unique, but they're in a very interesting spot, right? And so because of that, Sam Lake likely heard these stories of Baba Yaga growing up as well. And so he decides to put Baba Yaga into a game, but Baba Yaga is a weird name to have in English, right? Now, it wouldn't, if you want to name them Baba Yaga, have at it, I suppose.
Well,
pick a name that's a little more subtle is the better way.
We talked about sometimes the references can be on the nose.
Yes.
I mean, naming her literally Baba Yaga would probably be too on the nose.
Yeah. Although if you're familiar with Baba Yaga, going to that hut on Cauldron Lake, first off, the hut, well, okay, we'll get into the hut when we get there. It's the next part. But there's a lot there. It's pretty obvious if you know the story. Otherwise, it's going to completely go over your head.
Yeah, right.
But Barbara Yager, or Yager, I guess. Yager would be, well, anyways, there's different ways to pronounce it.
Yeah, sure.
But Barbara Yager, is it Yager or Jaeger? Sorry. One's German, one's
I can't remember
Swedish.
how it was pronounced in the game or if it was.
Okay.
I don't remember.
I think it's Yager. I think it's Barbara Yager because that sounds like Baba Yaga.
I'm cool with going with that.
So that name, Barbara, actually comes from the old Greek word, which essentially means like a foreigner, right? It's kind of where the word barbarian comes from as well. And then Yager means to hunt, like a hunter. So Barbara Yager is the foreign huntress, something like that, right? Mm-hmm. But there's another connection here to Twin Peaks that I only found out very recently because I went in and just started watching season 2. Season 2 of Twin Peaks is off the hooks, by the way. That is unbelievable. You guys got to watch that show. I'm not going to give anything away about it. You just have to watch it. But it's also entirely possible that the name Barbara and Baba have some connection to the name Bob as well from Twin Peaks. And that is... I will say no more. I will say no more. But there are some connections there. So that's Barbara Yager. That sounds so weird to say that. Oh man,
that's funny. Anyways, yeah.
So yeah, we got the wrong key, and then
she gives you the key to, or not gives you, gives Alan the key, and they're on their way. Alan and Alice drive to an eerie cabin on Cauldron Lake. Alice then reveals that she hopes the setting will help her husband work through his writer's block. This frustrates him, and he storms out of the cabin alone. Alice, who has a terrible fear of the dark, screams. He rushes back into the cabin, only to find that she has vanished. Alan then dives into the lake in a desperate attempt to save her, and everything goes black.
The arrival here at the cabin is fascinating. First off, it's absolutely beautiful. The mountain scenery here, they did a great job. Like, it looks so good.
They really did.
And this is a place called Cauldron Lake, right? Which cauldron is a word. First of all,
we're talking about witches.
Witches, bubbling, heat, hot, right? Volcano, maybe a little bit.
Sure, that's a great point.
There's kind of both.
There is
here.
a volcano under this lake. Yeah,
and so it's a cauldron, which the idea is something about boiling water, which can symbolize the witch as well as the earth itself, the volcano. So then, as we're walking in, there's the island there. It's called Diver's Island, right? Which is cool.
Yeah.
We're going to talk more about that later, probably. But it's called Diver's Island. And we walk down closer, and then the house, I wrote this down, the house is just absolutely fascinating. It looks very strange. There's 2 circular cutouts on the side, and you look at the siding of the house, it almost looks like feathers, right? Like it kind of actually looks like fish scales, but I think it was meant to be feathers. Kind of looks a bit like an owl or a bird. It's called Bird Leg Cabin, by the way. And remember, I mentioned,
my goodness,
I mentioned Baba Yaga's hut.
You don't know the Baba Yaga stuff, but it's all right there.
Yes,
yeah,
it's
crazy.
all right there. And the coolest thing about it is those 2 circular windows, because that's the room he goes up to write in. And you see those, and they look like eyes, right? This whole thing is designed to look like a bird, and they're the eyes. But the wildest thing is that when he goes up to the room after Alice is like, "Hey, got a surprise for you," and he's like, "Ooh, I wonder what this is," and then it turns out, no, you go over here. There's a typewriter. I actually signed you up for a retreat, and he's not happy about that. But inside that room, there's the 2 circles, and then there's an owl in the middle of it, above the typewriter, in kind of what would be the third eye position. It's in between the windows, but raised up a little bit, and it's an owl. Now, owls are nocturnal, right? So if we're going to look at some symbolism here, we're going to say, the third eye is the night eye. This is, so you got your 2 eyes that can see during the day. This is the eye that sees at night. It sees things the other 2 don't. It sees the spiritual realm. It sees into stuff, but it is symbolized by this owl. And the owl, being the nocturnal creature, is going to kind of, be something of a guide for Alan as he's navigating this other world, the world of his nightmares, you could say.
I as soon as you say that, I begin thinking about how light is used as a beacon or guide in the nighttime sequences.
Yeah.
And so I think this owl being in the house of Baba Yaga, I think, and just generally, owls are kind of seen as maybe like, the hooting is kind of creepy and things like that.
Yeah.
But
well, they represent the night, so they are creepy because most birds are asleep at night, but they're awake. So that makes them, once again, mysterious. And we have that word there. It's something we want to figure out, but we can't because they're not awake when we're awake.
But there's something about Alan Wake's journey through this game of in the darkness. So in the nighttime sequences where you're doing all your combat and things like that, that light, that beacon of light, and the voice he hears being a sort of like initiation or opening of Alan's third eye,
of his night vision. Yeah, his third eye. Yeah.
Right. I'm going to keep my eye
There's
on
something there.
That, whether those 2 things cross and what that's representing versus it just being like a creepy Baba Yaga thing.
Well, and as you see that light, what the diver, right? He's got something kind of similar going on with him, except he has 4 circles, right? But he has the 2, and then he has 1 up top, but then he also has 1 kind of in the middle or below. Yeah. So he looks kind of creepy himself.
Yeah, and as Ivan is saying here, owls are often used as symbols of wisdom.
Wisdom, absolutely. You're right.
Which would fit perfectly with a third eye positioning.
So Athena was symbolized by the owl, and of course Athena was a goddess of wisdom, and also the feminine god power energy was typically also symbolized by the nighttime, right? That the night is the mystery of the feminine, whereas the day is the point of the masculine. And there's something also, as we talked about the points versus the curves, there's some masculine, feminine kind of thing going on there. And we live in a hyper masculine kind of culture, I think, in most ways. And that leads us to be very point centric, if that makes sense. And to say if it doesn't have a point, it's not worth as much, right? And then the things that are curvy have their allure and attraction, but they don't have a point. Okay, I'm going to drop the
there's some generalizing going on, but like there's a point to be made.
Exactly.
In that.
There's something there, and it's something I've been thinking of for a long time.
Yeah.
And this also goes into what Ian McGilchrist talks about with the left brain versus the right brain. Right?
Sure.
The left brain is a lot more like object focused. It controls the right hand, and most humans are right-handed, right? And it's about grabbing things and picking things up and pointing, whereas the left hand is more about just generally stabilizing or moving or kind of feeling things in a different way, not meant to grab stuff, because that's the right brain is more geared towards looking out for predators or trying to get a feel of the terrain, as opposed to, oh, there's food, I'm going to eat it. And there's a different approach between the left brain versus the right brain that sort of maps a little bit. Ian McGilchrist doesn't totally agree with this, but I feel like it sort of maps a little bit onto the feminine versus masculine kind of distinction that we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Of course, it's not like 100% feminine. It's more like 60-40, kind of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's not specifically one thing or the other.
Yeah.
But it's something like that.
Sliding scale, which we've been saying since we go all the way back to Xenogears on this stuff. So if you haven't watched that, know that we understand we're not talking about black and white,
right?
Freaking 0 1s here. We're talking about there's a scale for where people fall on this between the masculine and feminine, or we could just call it the anima and animus.
Sure, actually, because if we're bringing Jung in here, which we are, that's a big deal because his wife, as we see soon, falls into the lake, the subconscious, and he has to go find her and rescue her from the waters. Right. And that is pretty clear Carl Jung reference, I think.
Yeah. All right.
And then the only line that really stuck out for me here was, it might have been from the radio. I can't remember if this was him narrating himself or if it was that radio guy who's always talking, but he says something like, the stars will light your way, right?
I think that was the radio
guy. The radio guy. So he was saying, oh, it's a nice clear night, everybody. Yep, the stars will light your way, which reminds me of Jiminy Cricket, let the stars be your guide, or something like that.
I really liked how they set up this character, the guy with the radio.
The radio guy.
You meet him right at the very beginning on the same ferry.
Yeah.
And like he is almost a guide for you in the game.
Oh, he totally is.
Every time you come to a radio, he gives you context about what's going on.
Yeah.
You kind of like, oh shoot, like FBI or F me, or like, you know, there's this sense that like he almost acts as a guide for you in a similar way that like the points of light work as a guide for you. He's
the stars,
informing you about the things that are happening that you need to know as he's, heading towards his objectives and stuff like that.
Well, the radio itself gave me some pretty heavy Spec Ops The Line.
Oh, yes.
I got some Spec Ops The Line vibes here as well. Not just with the constant audio that's always happening, which BioShock did as well, but Spec Ops The Line did a pretty good job of, but also the radio kind of being a not insignificant part of finding out where to go and of kind of moving the story forward.
Sure.
And I agree with you. I like the character as well, the way he introduced himself, and then immediately asked for an interview, even though, and Alan Wake, of course, is like, dude, look, I'm on vacation. And that guy could have maybe taken offense, like, oh, Alan Wake's a jerk, Instead, he's like, I understand, but it's my job. I just figured I'd ask, hey, enjoy your time here. Enjoy Deerfest.
Which
we have not yet brought up. The signs everywhere. Deerfest. Deerfest is coming.
For some kind of festival.
The Feast of the Deer. Now, there are feasts of the deer that happen around in the world. In ancient Greek times, there was a specific festival in the springtime, and this was more to do with Artemis, the goddess of the hunt, right, who would hunt the deer, and then people would make these offerings of deer. And there is a mythological element to the concept behind Deerfest as well. Of course, the word fest meaning feast, but also is like just a party, right? It's just a fun time. And so there's the lead up to the big holiday, and which a holy day is what the word holiday means. And so the whole town kind of revolves around this holy day, which is the Feast of the Deer, which has its roots going way back in ancient mythology. And that's just interesting. We'll just say that right now. We'll just say that that's very interesting. And deer are a common occurrence within the game. I think that's just because they live there in Washington. But that web series, did you get to watch any of that yet?
Not yet.
Okay, you got to check it out.
As I was saying to our patrons before we started the episode, there's a sort of like maxed out bandwidth,
It's all good, man.
which I have at the moment. I'm doing my very best.
It's all good. But deer play a big part in the web series as well.
Yeah.
And in particular, the deer cause problems. We'll just put it that way.
Yeah.
Deer are a symbol of the unconscious as well. It's just it's nature. It's fate. It's the world around you. And then everything kind of snaps into place once you have your holiday where you offer the sacrifice to the gods.
Okay. So we need to take like one step back just to make a quick diversion. I'm not even really sure it's a diversion. But first of all, I think there's going to be a lot of deer symbolism in Alan Wake 2, which we will not get to for a long time.
I am not
There's
aware
a lot
of
of
that.
characters that wear masks that are deer.
Is it?
It's yes.
Okay.
There's some sort of cult or something like that.
Oh,
I don't know that much about it.
Well,
I just know I've seen a lot of
don't either.
artwork about the game where people are wearing deer masks.
I know nothing about Alan Wake or Alan Wake 2.
Alan Wake 2.
Okay.
So I'm sure that'll have relevance later. Secondly,
cool.
Ivan is asking here about, did we check the shoe boxes while we were in the cabin? You are going to have
That's
to tell
pretty
me what's
specific.
going on with that, because I did not do that. What happens?
Well, I may have. I don't. A heart. You're right. A deer is a heart.
Yeah, the other word for it. Yeah.
Yeah. Books by Thomas Zane. Yeah, the poet. Yes, I did. They are relevant later. I did see that, but I didn't do it then. I did it later in the game.
Oh.
I opened
So
thing.
the books, the shoe boxes have books from Thomas Zane inside of them. That's what you're saying?
What's the you're saying it's drawn on the same symbolism?
He might be responding to Hopeless Romantics,
Oh.
who brought up here that the owl is a big symbol
of Satan,
in the Bohemian Grove.
I'm aware of this. I've seen the videos of
of Bohemian Grove.
Yeah, the Alex
If you guys
Jones
haven't
video.
heard of Bohemian Grove,
That's wild, man.
I'm not telling you to like take it seriously or anything, but I am saying you could spend a long night going down rabbit holes researching Bohemian Grove.
It's not just an owl. It's like an owl goat looking Baphomet. I think it's Baphomet is what it's supposed to be.
Right.
And there's some fascinating symbolism there. I don't think that's quite what's being referenced here. Although they do talk a little bit about a secret society maybe later on. We'll talk about that a little bit.
But it lends to owls can in some contexts be seen as creepy
yes,
or weird
absolutely.
or evil.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's what the symbol's being used for.
I don't
necessarily.
think so.
Yeah.
But it's possible. But I haven't played Alan Wake 2. When Alan regains consciousness, he's in a wrecked car with no memory of how he got there. He stumbles through the woods only to realize that things have taken a surreal and terrifying turn. The forest around him is dark, and strange shadows begin closing in, echoing the nightmare sequence from earlier. Along the way, he finds passages of a manuscript titled Departure that seems to describe events happening around him. What's even stranger is that Alan doesn't remember writing any of it. The manuscript implies that a dark force is manipulating events in Bright Falls, drawing Alan deeper and deeper into a horror story he can't control. After killing a possessed Carl Stuckey, Alan tries to alert Sheriff Sarah Breaker of his wife's disappearance, but Sheriff Breaker states that there has been no island or cabin in Cauldron Lake for decades after it sank in a volcanic eruption. Breaker believes that Alan is mentally unwell and takes him to the police station. Meanwhile, Barry arrives in Bright Falls in search of Alan.
I think this is my favorite. I don't know if gimmick is the right word, maybe just framework with which this story works inside of. As far as style goes, I love how this foreshadows things. I love how this can sort of act as an anchor, maybe like we were talking about in the last episode, to kind of make this game feel like you are playing a novel. It's really unique in that sense, I feel like. There's a lot of games that'll have a narrator narrating things while you're seeing it. This is probably the only game I felt like a novel's coming to life, and it literally is. It literally is for him.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, like, he doesn't remember writing this book. I can imagine for a second, I wrote a book, I don't remember writing it, I'm finding the pages from my own book and reading it back in my own words, how surreal that would feel.
Yeah.
And like, holy crap, like, like this is the idea, right? You're an author. You created a story. You wrote a setup for a payoff. You had it all in mind, but you're reading your own writing without knowing that, without like having the creator sort of like intention for the payoff and what is this set up for. There's something really unnerving almost about that. You should know what this is foreshadowing or where this is going, and you don't.
Yeah.
And that's like really, really weird to be reading your own words and not like fully understand what's going to happen next. I'm not sure if I'm even articulating that well enough, how strange and creepy that would almost feel to read your own work and not know where it's going. But it sets it up to where as you're exploring this game world and you're finding these manuscript pages, it's kind of out of order. So you might get one early because you'll open it up and there's a whole list of like all the missing manuscript pages you haven't collected yet. They're grayed out, right? So maybe you pick one up and it comes up here towards the top. Yeah. But then the next one you get is like 10 pages down.
It's way lower.
And it's like, whoa, what happened in between all that?
Yeah.
And you're picking them up out of order and like trying to piece together the story. And I just really, really like that as a quote unquote gimmick or framework with which this game uses to narrate or deliver its story. I think it's really, really cool.
It's very clever. And like I mentioned in the last episode, you get to kind of double dip on the impactful scenes, right? Because when you read about it, you think one thing and then it happens and you see the reality unfold, but it's suspense driving either way, both ways.
Yes.
Are there any other games that do
I don't know of one if there is. I think this game's very unique in this aspect.
Yeah, it's fascinating to reveal the story before. I think somebody commented on our last video actually mentioning that this is kind of like Dune, where Frank Herbert would, at the beginning of each chapter, he would kind of give away what was going to happen in the chapter.
Princess Irulan writes a little passage from her histories about Muad'Dib, and then like you read about like what inspired that passage. And
you would think that, oh, well, that gives it away, that ruins it, that it's telegraphed like this, but it doesn't. It actually presents the initial writing presents a mystery that then you can explore throughout the rest of the chapter. That's what happens here. Each manuscript page presents another mystery, an unanswered question that we still don't ever really answer, but that we begin to explore, within the framework of the question. And it's utterly fascinating.
Another cool tool that this puts into like the writer's toolkit for here is that you can set people up for what they think that's going to mean, and then in context it means something else.
You're right. That's a good point.
You can misdirect people with this as well.
It's almost like the unreliable.
I think they do that in certain spots in ways that are really effective. So it's just again a really cool way to deliver the story out of context, out of order, setting things up that you think are going to happen one way, and maybe they technically do, but not quite how you expected.
Right,
You can, like you say, double dip in terms of surprise and things like that.
Which makes me wonder why other people don't do it, other than the fact that this is not easy to do.
Yeah.
Right. You've got to be careful when you're revealing information before it happens. Yet they do it like 100 times in this game, and usually to good effect.
Yeah. I also like how we're now introducing an alternate scenario as for the pretext for why Alan is here.
Yeah.
So we had our initial scenario. He came with his wife. He's struggling to write. She's trying to like take him to a place where he can get some inspiration.
Yeah.
But she also did bring up this psychologist, Dr. Heartman.
Heartman, yeah.
She had his book.
Which, is it Heartman? If we're going to say that the word for deer is a heart,
yes,
then he is a deer man.
Yes,
is what he is.
Yes, I think you're exactly right about this.
And that's very interesting. We'll just put it that way. So
again, the deer symbolism is important. This is not for nothing, these references. But she kind of brought that up, and this is where he gets really upset. You're going to have me committed, kind of a thing. You think I'm going crazy.
Yep.
That's not even remotely suggested by her.
Right.
He just reveals that about himself, right?
Yes. And she also says, no, I'm also going to see him myself.
Yes.
I have this weird unresolved trauma about the darkness, and I'm sick of it. I hate being afraid of the dark. I found somebody to help me too, but maybe he can also help you. Yeah. And no, even that was just too far. you done screwed up.
Yeah.
And because I think what Alan says is something like, why does everybody, and then he doesn't really finish the sentence. And he's just like, ugh, I got to get out of here. And he says, I knew she wouldn't follow me into the darkness. Like, oh, that was that was a bad move.
Yeah.
Like that was a jerk move on his part.
Yeah, jerk move. Yeah.
Total jerk move.
Yeah.
But when he says, why does everybody, it's implying that he's not feeling the pressure to write the next novel just from one or two people. It's like millions of people.
Yeah.
When he says, well, everybody, why doesn't everybody? And they kind of joke about it on the, on one of the little Twilight Zone episodes, or one of the TV programs that you get to kind of watch. Like, ooh, if you're one of the 4 people who haven't read this book yet, go out and buy it. It's in stores today. Yeah. Like everyone reads his book, which means everyone's waiting for the next one. Yeah. And so when she is just really trying to be helpful, even slightly doing like a small degree of placing a small degree of discomfort onto him in the process, that is, like you mentioned before, one stone upon a pile of stones that is already weighing so heavily on him.
Yeah.
And every day that passes by is another day he still hasn't put a word down. And anything she does, she's walking on eggshells. Yeah. Anything she does is going to just like send him into a spiral. If I can't 100% relax on this vacation, if there's even one little thing, I'm going to lose it. And he kind of does.
Well, and going back to how Remedy used this as sort of an analogy to their own personal struggles, with coming off the back of the success of Max Payne, and not knowing how to move forward with a new thing. I think anybody who has tried to create something, who has tried to be a writer, who has tried to be an artist, who has tried to whatever it is,
podcaster,
who has tried to work on a project, a creative project, in a very serious fashion. They've really tried to make something.
Yeah, they're putting their soul into it.
And they have an audience for that. Yeah. There is just something so relatable about this kind of writer's block scenario where you just feel like, I have the skills, I've done this before, I know what I'm capable of, and for some reason I can't do this.
That's gotta be so frustrating.
Is going on? Why?
Yeah, that's gotta be so frustrating.
You know, baseball players, they call it, what do they call it? Having the yips.
Oh yeah.
A batter who's a great hitter all of a sudden can't hit. Yep. A pitcher who has got this amazing fastball, all of a sudden he just can't hit the strike zone.
I'm thinking of examples of all of this as you're saying it.
Yeah, like there's so many examples of this kind of thing that are super relatable, and this is essentially where he's at. And like you said, one more pebble in the backpack is going to just make him crumble. He just can't take it. It
may be a pebble to you, but to him, it may as well be a boulder.
That's what I was trying to say to the patrons at the beginning. I'm kind of reaching. I'm not going to crumble like emotionally, but just like I feel like my bandwidth in terms of like the workload I can carry is like maxed out. Anyway, that's neither here nor there.
There's this great psychologist I could introduce you to. You can go on a retreat.
Okay, so Dr. Hart.
Hold on though, real quick, because I have to say this again. Dr. Heartman fascinates me because it's very mysterious, his role in everything that's going on. But he is a different type of psychiatrist, psychologist, whatever he is. He's very experimental, right? And he is something of a psychopump between two worlds, between the world of the darkness, and he's kind of like a guide that stands in between both worlds and kind of uses the darkness to help his clients, or has his clients kind of step foot into it, and he ushers that whole thing. Yeah. So him being named Heartman, it isn't just an interesting play on words because he's a deer man or whatever, but the idea of being half an animal and half a human is the idea. It is the idea of having your foot in two worlds. I'm part beast, part human. I'm part unconscious, part conscious. I have access to this world that you don't have access to. And it's right there in the name as well as his profession. So I don't think I'm off base with that connection.
You're not off base. You're literally right on target.
I think that's right on.
But yeah, so when he wakes up from the crash, right, this is again setting up a different scenario. I've kind of gone way off course from that. The initial scenario, they're going together and they're on the ferry and they're going to town. Here, he's crashed. Alice is nowhere to be seen. He just kind of
wakes up. After he dives in the water, he just wakes up in a crashed car, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, how did you get from jumping into a lake to you car crashed on your way into town.
Not only that, it's a week later.
Yeah.
He's missing 7 days now.
And Dr. Hartman's book is in the back of the car that crashed, right?
Right.
So anyway, it's setting up this new scenario or new pretext for the reason he's there. So this is where you have your first nighttime sequence. You fight a bunch of enemies and things like that. But
the fact that the cabin doesn't exist really makes me wonder which of these 3 scenarios you presented at the beginning we're dealing with in this point.
Yeah.
Obviously, once the Barbara Yaga gives us that key and we begin driving somewhere, the magic, the shadow power is already in effect.
I just thought of something too. They were there to get a key to a place. She didn't only hand over a key, she handed over instructions for how to get to the place.
Yes,
which means he probably wasn't
somewhere
intended
else
to stay on this house on the island in the
guy
first
was
place.
probably going to put him in a different
other cabin somewhere else.
Yeah.
So her showing up and giving him instructions
to her house. She says, to my house is what she says. And then she says, I'll check on you while you're there.
To a house that does not exist and hasn't for decades on that island.
Right.
Another interesting mystery.
Very intriguing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. So once he gets to the police station, right, and it's like this police officer is essentially acknowledging like that house doesn't exist. He's like, well, just let me take you there. So they drive by it, and it's not there.
You see, I think like the title of something like Diver's Island, or you see the frame structure there, but then the road goes into the water, and there's nothing there.
Yeah, right.
The caldera, everything is gone. It's all sunk. The island sank into the lake.
Yes.
And we got to talk about that next episode because that is so interesting. It is so interesting. But yeah, basically his whole time with Alice, in the last 7 days, something happened that just threw everything out of whack, and he has no idea what it is.
Yeah.
And he's trying to figure it out, but there is a disconnect between reality and his understanding of it, I guess. His dreams and reality have begun to cross.
Yeah. The conscious and the unconscious are
absolutely
crossing over. We got a blurred line between the two. So he's getting patched up by this retired kind of fisherman guy while the sheriff is trying to figure out, what's going on.
Yeah.
He's at the police station there.
They shine a light in his eye, which is only interesting if you've seen the web series. So I'll just say, go see the web series. But the doctor shines a light in his eyes, and he's cool about it, I suppose. Yeah. But yeah, then they kind of patch him up, and he's saying to himself the whole time, like, I can't tell them the truth. There's a dead guy, and I'm pretty sure I'm the one who killed him, and they're going to suspect me, and I'll never see Alice again. I can't tell them what happened, but I still need to get Alice back. I need their help, but I can't tell them what actually happened.
Right. So he's there in the police station. He comes out. There's some people talking. The lady who's obsessed with the lights, and then he gets the call.
Yeah.
I think he gets the call while he's talking to the cop, because he goes in to talk to her for a second,
and they say,
and
go
then they call it, like,
get
stop
the thing.
talking to the cops, and then he goes outside,
right,
and then like has that conversation. He comes back in, and that's when Heartman shows up, and he punches him in the face, and then Barry arrives. So that sort of sets up where we're going here into chapter 2. Which is he's got to meet up with this kidnapper. But what I found, again, it's not a problem with the character. It's like my personal problem with this guy if you were a real person.
Sure.
What are you doing? Like, you just got a call from a kidnapper saying, I'm going to freak it. I've got your wife. You better meet me with the manuscript pages from this book
that you don't
remember writing, and that you don't have all the pages for because you're collecting them as you play the game. Show up with that freaking book, please.
Yeah.
Or else, something bad's going to happen.
Yeah, use your imagination.
He just got off the phone from that conversation saying, stop talking to the cops and meet me here. And then Dr. Heartman shows up, who, I remember he said, his smug face, I just wanted to punch him in the face. All the way back.
When he saw the trunk.
In the car wreck, and he saw the book. So I guess there's a setup to that. So I'm not criticizing it.
Yeah.
That's not the point of what I'm saying. I'm saying if I got off the phone with somebody who just told me, I have your wife, show up with this or else, and I'm in a police station who I'm not supposed to be like making a scene or getting involved at all, and I assault a man right in front of the freaking sheriff, it's just not a good idea.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's a pretty bad idea.
If your goal is to help your wife, it's a really bad idea.
So the reasons why he did it, if I can lay this out here, Dr. Heartman shows up and said, oh, hey, I'm the reason why your wife even came out here in the first place. And then it's like, you're the reason why we're here and she got kidnapped. I hate you, gonna punch you. The other thing is he had punched a paparazzi just like not too long before this. Barry kind of tells us about that. Like, this is just like with the paparazzi. Come on, man, get a hold of yourself. So Alan is prone to punch people he's upset at.
He can't control his anger.
A pretty good reason to be upset at Heartman. Not that it's Heartman's fault, although it might be. Not that it's Heartman's fault necessarily, but that, like, my wife just got kidnapped and she came here because of you. You deserve to be punched, not me, you. And I almost feel this as well because we see that image of Alan Wake on the cover of his book, right? And something tells me that when he's projecting, he's doing some hardcore projection here. He doesn't like himself. When he sees that big, tall cutout of himself, he's not a fan. His face is on his books, right? But then he sees someone else who's just as pretentious as he is. And he's like, oh, that person needs to be punched. Nobody should do that. But he does that. And then the guy shows up and it's like, oh, I might have like 2% of the responsibility. You have all the rest, but I've got like 2% of it. And like, oh, you need to be punched. But it's like, dude, look inside yourself for something, right? Like this problem that's not that guy who introduced the entire problem to you, right? A lot of this is your problem. And I think Alan Wake is dealing with some self issues and he's projecting pretty hard and he probably feels like he's not worth a ton and needs to get punched himself. But instead he just projects and then does the punching on other people.
Right. I think that's probably pretty.
Because he's rich and he can get away with it. When Barry shows up and he's just like, I got lawyers that you can't even, don't you dare get your hands off. Even if he punched you, it doesn't matter because I got the money and the lawyers. So you stay here and we're getting out of the station. And you can tell that Alan Wake doesn't really have consequences for his actions because he's got money and he's got an agent and he's got lawyers and he's got publishers and all that stuff. Yeah. So he gets to do what he wants, but really it's kind of like a net negative on him. It's actually made his life, arguably worse than better, because he's just projecting and it's delaying his introspection. He can blame it on other people. And yeah, that's right. My lawyer said it's actually your fault. So, I don't have to worry about it. And sooner or later, he's going to have to come to terms with himself instead of putting the blame out on all these other people.
Yeah. I think it's a good place to leave off. That kind of sets us up for chapter 2.
Yes.
I know we said we were going to cover chapters 1 through 3, but this is not new for this show.
Well, first off, this happens all the time. Second off, this game's really interesting.
It's really
and
cool.
Perhaps, we always overestimate what we'll be able to do. Yeah. But it's better to do that than to underestimate.
I agree. So looks like this will turn out to be a little bit longer series maybe than we were initially anticipating. I'm sure all the Alan Wake fans are super upset that we'll spend more episodes talking about.
Oh, no.
But yeah, we'll get into chapter 2 and I hope 3.
I think we'll be able to do 2
next episode. So make sure you've played that for next time. But as always, feel free to just beat the game and come back with knowledge of the whole thing. It's usually a better thing to do when you're doing a long form analysis, beat the whole thing. But
yeah.
We'll do chapter 2 and 3 next time. Thanks, everybody. See you then. Peace out.
Peace.